All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, Rami, and for the introduction. Thank you for the hospitality of the New York office, and thank you, everyone in Beirut, for your attendance and participation. So I wanted to start by setting a little bit the grounds in which we work at AUB within the region, and think about how, when we think of the Middle East here from the US, but from elsewhere as well, we have a sense that this is a region with very high inequalities, all kinds of inequalities, class, gender, but also a region that's been devastated by wars, counts the largest waves of forced population displacements in the world, is suffering from issues of climate change, and consequently a region which is really in trouble. Of course, there's nothing cultural about this. It's the outcome of a colonial legacy and an ongoing history, but the region is in trouble. And because of a growing urbanization around the world, these troubles are materializing in our cities. So when we look at cities in the Middle East today, Beirut, Amman, these are cities that have about a quarter of their populations that arrived in the last 10, 15 years, so they're refugees. They're cities that are struggling to support their previous and current populations with infrastructure. Beirut has frequent power outages, traffic jams. It suffers from all sorts of things that we as planners attempt to address. And so for us at AUB, and for me really teaching with colleagues in the graduate programs in urban studies and urban planning, there's a struggle to remain relevant in what we do by engaging the context in which we are. And it's something which is quite similar to colleagues we have in other cities in the region, Amman, Cairo, but also around the world as well. We see this in India and Latin America, where universities teaching city planning are increasingly thinking about how they can engage the context and produce the knowledge that is useful for the cities where they're located. Now, as a university, what do? You basically need to respond to three lacks, I think. A lack of information. We don't really know what is happening. We don't have the data. There's a lack of skills. We don't training. And then there's what I think of as a lack of ideas, of frames, of how to rethink the problems in ways that you can then address them differently, be able to tackle them. And so to do that, you start in a program of city planning with what I call the work of translation. So let me explain. When I came back from graduate studies to Beirut and started teaching city planning, I graduated with a class where the vast majority of my colleagues went to work in the public sector or in CDCs here in the United States, in community development corporations. In Lebanon, I've taught for the last 20 years, I have only taught one student from the public sector, and this one student left the public sector as soon as she graduated. So the critical assumption that planning makes, that there's such a thing as a common good, and we're all as city planners designing infrastructure systems, housing mechanisms, public spaces to respond to this common good, is based on the idea that there is such a thing as a modern nation state that is the custodian of this common good. And when you get to contexts where the modern nation state is not there, and when the tools that you use to measure and count this common good in the US, you have the census, which is every 10 years, you have data about the housing market, Harvard University produces the State of the Housing Report. In Beirut, you have none. There's not been a census for the population since 1932. So basically what we had to do is to reinvent the profession. We couldn't just take a curriculum from here and just say, okay, we can teach you the same thing in Beirut. It's not relevant because the critical assumptions about what makes planning possible do not exist. And so for the last 15, 20 years, I think there's a lot of work that's been happening between me and other colleagues in trying to imagine who can be the custodian of the common good, which piece of the common good, and how do you actually teach students to think through and become themselves people who can design a small common good. So we emphasize much more research methods, we emphasize much more theories that teach people how to frame questions, design questions in a different way so that they actually can, when they're faced with a problem, be able to ask it differently. I recall, for example, when the first large wave of refugees arrived to Beirut back in 2012, I was approached as a housing expert by UNHCR. And what they wanted is to produce housing. They had the sense that you've just had several hundred thousands of people in the city, and where do you house them? We need to produce housing. How do you produce housing? And my reaction was, let's see where people are housed. And so I went back for a month, tried to work in the city's low-income neighborhoods, understood that there was a new market that had developed with people re-subdividing their homes, creating rooms and spaces in them, and that a number of neighborhoods in Beirut had become sort of de facto camps, places where over 70% of the residents were actually refugees. And so I came back to UNHCR with a proposal saying you should not produce housing. The market has produced the housing. What you need to be doing is upgrading the neighborhoods, because you know what? Those neighborhoods now, it's the infrastructure that's crumbling. They cannot support anymore the size of the population. And so with negotiations, of course, because it's counterintuitive, because UNHCR doesn't think it needs to be providing infrastructure, it thinks of itself as crisis response, we were able to change the frame of how you approach housing in a moment of crisis. And now I see like the whole paradigm has shifted. But this involves students all the time, so they're helping with field work, they're going with us to the neighborhoods, and this allows them also to, on the ground, get engaged. When they get a chance to speak in the second part of the presentation, you'll see that also when they graduate, they build their own projects, their own initiatives, to be able to imagine forms of reformulating the question and finding a champion who actually can support it, because that's part of the game. So that's for teaching, and so when I look at the content of the courses, the learning outcomes, I see that they've really changed over the years, and they look less and less like the typical program. And I think there's a lot that can now be learned here and in other contexts of the North, as the old ideas of the welfare state and the ideals of modernism that brought equality and the role of the state as a true custodian of the common good are also being challenged. And so I feel that there's a lot that we can now teach and think with colleagues in universities here in the US and elsewhere. The second piece that I wanted to talk about is the ideas. How do you produce the ideas that change things? How do you engage your context? And from my position as a professor, and again with work with colleagues, we've been doing two different things. On the one hand, what you want to do is engage the local context with explanations for how things work. Put in the public realm issues for debate. And so for the last 10 years, we've been publishing every 2 or 3 years a piece of work that says, how about you think of that? And that's something that we simplify, that we put in local newspapers, that we go on TV and talk about. In 2012, for example, we talked about security. Beirut was becoming a city that was highly securitized after the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri. And so you had roadblocks, no parking signs, lots of public spaces were being closed, and we wanted to create a conversation about, so what does it mean to have a city with no public space? What does it mean when your public space assumes that every person in the public is a criminal and may actually kill a handful of important individuals who are highly protected and close highways and roads and streets? And so we mapped security. And that was very exciting, because we ended up producing a map of Beirut that showed every single tank, roadblock, closure. And when the map came out, colleagues in Berlin and Barcelona started saying, oh my God, we want to publish this. We have the same, we never thought about it. And so this trend of securitization that we were trying to denounce from Beirut became a discussion that went all over and got us to discuss with colleagues what is different, what is the same, and how to actually address it. Of course, in Lebanon, this was very important because people suffered from the fact that these roadblocks were creating traffic jams, they were preventing circulation. A little later, we produced something about public spaces, and that was really trying to push the idea that even if a space is privately owned, there's still a claim from the city dwellers on these kinds of spaces. You cannot assume that just because you own a space, if the land registry was done 100 years ago or 80 years ago and did not account for the fact that there was a public claim on the space, that you can just ignore it. And so that's been a conversation that's ongoing with a lot of translation, particularly in relation to Beirut's coast, because the city's coast was largely privatized during the making of the land registry. And so Beirut comes one of the most beautiful coasts on the Mediterranean. It's within the same city. You have sandy beaches, you have rocky beaches, and most of them are actually held by private ownership. And so being able to create the legal grounds to reclaim these spaces and put forward regulatory mechanisms to ask the municipality to adopt and protect became something that we're very engaged in. That's really, I would say, over the last 10 years, changed the conversation about the coast. Our last piece of work in this tradition has been refugees as city makers. And that was really in reaction to two things. On the one hand, in popular press, and I'm sure you're familiar with this here in the United States, refugees are always presented as a threat, as possibly changing the local culture, as taking the jobs. And on the other hand, there's a whole representation of refugees as like aid recipients. So you see international organizations giving them aid. The World Food Program has distributed debit cards to refugees, and so people who are low-income city dwellers in a country where less than 50% of the population actually has a bank account, this is seen as really like these people are being treated better than we are. And so there's a lot of tension around the presence of the refugee and a lot of misrepresentation. And so what we try to do is to produce a collective piece of work that would speak about how refugees are actually transforming Beirut. And I'm going to be talking more about this week in the American Collegiate School of Planning conference, where I want to present an argument about the relevance of thinking through refugees as city makers, not only for Beirut, but also for other contexts. But my main entry point has been a study on the delivery drivers, so the food delivery drivers who in Beirut over the last 6-7 years have increased exponentially in numbers. So now anywhere where you go in the city, you see these young guys with a black backpack on their back, and they're driving motorcycles. Sometimes they're going one way the wrong way. They're lined up in front of restaurants, and they've really changed the landscape, a lot of things. And one of the things I argue is they've changed how we actually eat in the city and what we eat. And they've changed the way the restaurant industry works. So they're not just changing a small neighborhood, they're transforming an entire society by this practice. And what is beautiful about the organization of this group when you meet it is that it does include Lebanese and Palestinian people as well. And they have their WhatsApp group, and so they warn each other about the police, and they reorganize themselves in the neighborhoods. This neighborhood has heightened security. You will be stopped as a Syrian, don't go, I would go. So they will redistribute their work between each other. And that creates the kinds of solidarities you want to talk about in this belonging to Beirut. And it also challenges the way in which we think through forced population displacement in terms of people who are hidden, who have no entitlement, because by being visible, by driving the motorcycle, you're actually claiming new space in the city. And they're very clear about that. They find that this visibility is an added freedom. It's a way in which they can reclaim their presence affirmatively. And so this kind of work has been, for me, very, very nice in terms of connecting the research that we do and then translating a piece of it to the public in very simple language, also in mapping that we do in collaboration with colleagues in the graphic design programs, so that we can create new languages for how people can engage this knowledge and share it. So that's one piece of what we do in terms of research that's actually engaging the public. The other piece has more to do with participating with colleagues who are professionals, professional planners, environmental scientists, and putting out real projects for Beirut. And that for me has become very, very important because in the absence of something that people can envision to be a better city, you end up in a context where people are less able to imagine this collective. And so making a plan for how the city coast should be zoned, making a plan for how a highway plan to cross through neighborhoods should be turned into a park, have been tools that we're using in collaboration with activist groups to basically change what people are asking of the city and what they imagine to be a possible urban environment. And so these are sort of the two trends we're following. And I have to say the second trend eventually ended up spilling over because a lot of us became interested in getting engaged as even as individuals outside the university in challenging the way the city is being planned. And one of the most rewarding experiences was back in 2016 when we mounted with colleagues inside and outside AUB, we mounted a campaign called Beirut Madinati that ran candidates to the local municipal council. And what I really like about this campaign was that it used the tools of planning to engage people back in the political. So in Lebanon, when you say the word politics, and I think this is really true, I see my niece here in the US, it's kind of the same. I don't understand politics, politics is dirty. People have a feeling that it's corruption, that it's nothing you really want to do. And so what we wanted to do was reconcile people with the public, with this notion of public engagement that's so important in the political. And we did that through putting out plans, projects for what can happen to Beirut. So the entire campaign of Beirut Madinati was built on these projects that people could talk about. And people started saying things like, in Curitiba, they made a rapid transit system, and the rapid transit system transformed the way people move around. And if Brazil can do it, there's no reason why we wouldn't do it. And people started saying, there is a plan that was designed for Beirut to be pedestrianized 5 years ago, and it's been approved. But no one has implemented it, and it can be implemented. And we still see this today, and I think it's a re-engagement with the public that's needed, and a new entry point to the political that's a little bit different from the traditional understanding of politics. Some people see it as less political, less big picture. We're not talking about Lebanon's foreign policy, but I argue that if you look at how it materializes on the grounds in the city, we are saying how we should relate to refugees, we are saying what kind of a society we need to be, how we should, as individuals, engage each other. And so these become spaces that locate us as scholars, as researchers, really in the public. They throw us, they force questions of us, they require us to be able to do things that we normally don't think of ourselves as professors having to do. But back to AUB, and just to close out, I say that we've been thinking a lot from the program of urban planning and urban policy how we are part of an ecosystem of change. So there are activists outside, there are colleagues who are professionals, practitioners who are doing amazing work. Some of the public sector agents are really trying hard to change the way in which the public sector is working in the city. And so our last initiative has been to establish an urban lab, what we're calling an urban lab. And it's basically this hub of researchers who we're hoping will be able to create from within the university the infrastructure to bring together people from the environmental sciences, engineering, and the social sciences, obviously, with us to consolidate the research on the urban, consolidate the partnerships with other research centers and nonprofit groups in the city, but also, and really importantly, begin to create a conversation at the regional scale about how our cities are transforming. This is something which is direly missing. If you look at other regional contexts, you'd see that in Africa, in Latin America, there are regional planning conferences and urban conferences that happen every year, and scholars actually participate in comparative work across their regions. We're still missing this. We think that from AUB, with the kind of research that's being produced, we have all the assets to actually be able to do that. And so we have the ambition to really begin to create a conversation. There are certain anchors like forced population displacement, climate change that will be critical because they are of and about the region. And I think that these are seeds for thinking about how you change the world, but also how you theorize and what is your role as a university from and in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Before we switch to Beirut, I want to just ask you one question. All of this work you're doing has been directly or indirectly taking you and your students and your graduates and your colleagues out into the public sphere, into the planning process, into the government system with the NGOs. What is the sense in AUB, as you understand it, of the appropriateness of this? Do you get people who say, look, this isn't your job, you're just supposed to teach students and do research, while in fact what you're doing is, as you said, you're creating new dynamics. And how is this generally fitting in to AUB's self-perception of its mission?
Okay, I'll just say two things. On the one hand, I do think that a scholar needs to be engaged with her discipline, with her community of colleagues who are writing in the same discipline. So being here, being at ACSP, speaking to colleagues, publishing in the top journals in my field is something that I find extremely rewarding, because that's how I also push my ideas and I am engaged. So I'm not giving up on this side of what it means to be an academic. On the other hand, I think AUB has been amazing in trying to play this role of a public institution. There's been work in publishing in the local press, in showing engagement with public issues in the country and beyond. And so I do think that this is very much in sync with the university's mission, and we're definitely personally, I think I'm getting all the encouragement that the institution can give. There will always be a question about the balance of how much you do of what. I often tell the junior colleagues to be a little bit more careful, and not because of censorship about what they're going to say, but more because you need to have first a voice in your discipline with your colleagues. But I think once you've established that, it becomes easier to take the risk, because it's a risk.
Thank you, Mona. And talking of amazing things, we will turn to Rabia Shibli, who has in his Center for Community Civic Engagement has done amazing things with his students and colleagues, and then we will hear from all of the people there in Beirut who would like to contribute. So Rabia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rami. Thank you, Mona. I'll just take maybe 2-3 minutes. So I am a graduate of this program, and I'm very proud to be a graduate from the Masters in Urban Design. I graduated in 2006, and for sure it's been, this has been one of the most pivotal stages in my life. It really affected the way I perceive planning or architecture, because also my BA is in architecture. In this program, basically, what they teach you is first critical thinking, and it's a very, there's a very heavy weight in this regard. And in a country like Lebanon, where you see ideologies and identities being mirrored and reflected in the planning practice and in the architecture, critical thinking makes you rethink and deconceptualize the way you used to perceive things early on. And the second part is also they value and they put a lot of weight on the value system that are imperative for any ethical practitioner, planning, or even architect practitioner to adopt. What value system do you nurture in such a program? So, both the critical thinking and the value system intersected for me personally when it came to developmental planning. And it really surfaced after 2006 war. I was just a graduate, and back then the professors, Muna and Waida, there were a group of professors at AUB who started the reconstruction task force, and we were facing that big challenge of more than 15,000 destroyed houses and whole urban settlement razed to ground in the south and in the southern suburb. And we started asking ourselves all the big questions: should we should we just go out there and adopt with the publication and the research project, or is it our role as practitioners and activists to do something about it? And again, this is where we also were faced by the three notions that Mona mentioned, which are the lack of information, lack of skills, and lack of ideas. And once you're faced with, again, these realities, also you reflect again on your role and the profession that you envision for yourself as a graduate, and your role among your community, your family, and your larger community. Then you know the story, the task force grew, and 2 years later, AUB institutionalized the Center for Civic Engagement. And again, the momentum is growing across AUB, and I think all other faculties now, they have outreach units. The urban planning and design program, I know that it grew into, it benefited a lot from the rich experience they gained through the years, and unfortunately the crisis that we've been witnessing. But the most remarkable change, and I keep on repeating, is how our students are gaining the skills out of the cumulative experiences that all of us are bringing into our centers, into our departments and faculty. I think this incremental change is being is palpable and is very vivid in the practice that the graduates and the students are taking outside, whether into the conventional planning firm, even if they're working in conventional firms, their mindset have already changed, and they're able to influence the decision makers in these organizations, or whether in the NGOs, and many of them are working in the international agencies and NGOs, and this is where you can really realize this incremental change, which with time it will for sure create a critical mass able to induce major changes. So I'll end up there, and I open up the floor like last time for the professors who are joined with us, and for the students and the graduates to share their experience, and if they have any questions for Mona in this regard.
Thank you, Rabia. I think let's stay in Beirut and let's hear from the students, graduates, and other participants there on any dimensions of these issues, particularly the theme of how what you learn and what you do and how you're molded in the university impacts how you actually then engage in society, and where you feel you've been able to make a difference, or maybe when you tried to make a difference and failed and couldn't make a difference, what are the lessons that you learned and continue to learn? And identify yourself quickly when you start.
Okay, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maya Majdoub. First of all, thank you for Mona for reaching out to me and to all of us here, and Rabia, and thank you everyone for hosting this event discussion. So I graduated in 2013 from the Masters of Urban Planning and Policy. And I work in the private sector, and currently I'm working with an international organization coordinating the National Urban Policy Program with UN Habitat. My intervention would be very brief, as I was asked, and it would be two-tier. First of all, to reflect on the curriculum, on my experience as a student here on the curriculum, and second, how this impacted my professional career. So first of all, with respect to the curriculum, actually I come from a background in public administration and policy, and holding this bachelor's degree is actually a challenge here in Lebanon because it's not quite common. Urban planning is not quite common in Lebanon. The focus is more developmental projects are diverted mostly towards design. So during this curriculum, I was actually encouraged, and as it sets forth complementarities between urban design and planning. However, it emphasizes urban planning as a prerequisite for urban design, and as it also encourages students from diverse backgrounds to enroll the program, as it enriches integrated planning approaches. So with respect to my professional career and the project that I'm currently coordinating, it's basically and briefly a program that it can be used as a tool for governments to manage rapid urbanization towards inclusive and resilient urban planning. So as most of you know that we don't have a Ministry of Planning in Lebanon, so we didn't know where to start in the beginning. It was obsolete since the 1970s. However, a Minister of State for Planning was elected in late 2016. We approached him to endorse and support us throughout the project, and he actually accepted that. However, I don't know if most of you know, he was formerly a Minister of Tourism. So we really had to work hard on trying to instill the planning paradigms, and especially that he has very limited resources and funding. So whenever we used to talk to him initially, and as you know, whenever you talk to any planning agency or planning stakeholders in Lebanon, when you say transportation, for example, they think of a bridge or a road or a traffic light. And when you talk to someone related to a housing or a housing expert, they tell you, I mean, in the private sector, they think of just erecting a building randomly without consideration for affordable housing, or whether this building encroaches the coastline and its effect on the public sphere. And also, they don't really consider the effect of erecting a highway with respect to settlements or any form of context analysis. So actually, we forged that dialect with the minister, and we actually were able to change his mindset. I think he transformed from a Minister of Tourism to actually having Urban Planning 101 now, which I mean, it's quite rewarding and encouraging because you actually, I mean, although, I mean, to finalize, I think in Lebanon, we all think it's a very challenging context. We cannot start from anywhere, but actually we're quite lucky that we have this context because in more advanced countries, everything is set. So you don't have a lot of room to maneuver here. You can start from zero and you can actually start the change starting from the government, reaching to planning to implementation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ili Bahini, and I'm a second-year student here at the Urban Planning and Policy Program. I'm sort of your atypical student. I started this at a late age after other masters for my career. But I wanted to build on my intervention about I've learned a lot because I had no idea what urban planning was about, and I feel that the majority of the rest of the Lebanese, as Dr. Fawad said, and everybody agrees that it's very difficult to forge the planning doctrine into the country. So since I have completely changed my mind and I'm fully into the field now, I feel it's very important that we influence the decision makers or the other stakeholders, like the mayors of municipalities or municipality council members, maybe in a way where we can direct to them also what we are learning and what we are trying, what everything that Dr. Fawad talked about. They need to know about that because they ultimately influence a lot of the decisions that happen. So I'm just paralleling, for example, with the MBA programs where they have executive programs for corporate managers and all of that. Maybe we can do something to that regard where we have courses that would cater to these to the municipality councils or politicians or some sort of a program that would be on a professional level. But I think the program is extremely valuable. I have learned so much and I'm very, very thankful for that. I hope I can continue on contributing forward. Thank you.
I graduated from the Master's of Urban Design 2 years ago. So I reflect more about the postgraduate experience and read section on the program for the students. First, I'd like to say that my interest in the field of urban planning primarily stems from its direct relation and impact on the public sphere. And after having graduated before from the Lebanese University with a master's in architecture, I strongly believe that the NUP and EDD program, here at AUD will give me the needed theories and tools to be able to engage with the difficulties and the realities of our city. In support to the values that I already have and the engagement I had, I was lucky to have been the valedictorian of the commencement ceremony this year in 2015. And in that speech, I pledged that this degree won't be just a tool to get a job, but to make the world a better place. And indeed, I still look at that speech as an oath I took at the beginning of my career. And since then, I turned down several job offers in big corporations here in Lebanon. And I wouldn't imagine myself either working in a humanitarian organization that assume working for the public good, but have their agendas and would control the political engagement that one might have after office hours. Also, in a context where public agencies do not provide the space for planners to change from within, and working in the public here only means the pension and healthcare coverage. And with the dire economic conditions of the country, I must say that I'm lucky I'm not jobless. And I was able to start my career without compromising on the values I have. So I work in a small planning office in Beirut with an amazing urban planners who's also engaged. And we work a lot on public projects, such as master plans. And we often see these projects that are for the public good hindered by state actors themselves. But we keep on fighting, and like, for example, we worked with others on an alternative for the Upland Highway and presented a design for a public park instead. We were commissioned to elaborate the Green Master Plan of Beirut and the soft connection in Beirut from the Pine Forest to the downtown 6 years ago by the municipality of Beirut, and we're still lobbying for their implementation. Also, after office hours, I participate in a political movement which I'm a member of, and I have devised national programs for the past elections, assisted in preparing a debate seminar on land and property in Lebanon and the region, with policy implications on Lebanon's today tagged urbanization, as one of our speakers called it. In sum, I was able to commit to the values which the program here has consolidated and support for the needed needs and theories, and I'm extremely grateful to you, Mona, and all the professors we had for that. And I'm grateful for the program that did not frame our thinking. It supported critical thinking instead and gave us impetus to become more and more engaged in the public. And I believe that the only way out for the youth and for this generation is not immigration, but to become engaged citizens here in Lebanon. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Ali Batar. I'm a grad. Yes. My name is Ali Batar, graduate student.
Could you raise your voice or get closer to the mic?
Yeah, okay. My name is Ali Batar, graduate student in urban design. Abir and I will talk about two shifts that we have experienced in our academic journey at AUD, Masters in Urban Design Policy and Urban Design. So the first one relates to how we were pushed by our professors to translate theoretical knowledge into implementations and practical projects. The second one is how AUB, especially AUB Neighborhood Initiative, fostered our initiative into really successful projects through exposing us to networks we work. First of all, I'd like to highlight that our program is not a technical program, as Rabia said. So it provokes critical thinking and to think or tackle issues like formality or privatization or public spaces is not easy at all. So thinking in a critical way beyond scientific rationality, it's hard. So this is maybe provoked us or led us to shift from or translate theory into projects or into initiatives. So for instance, in one of our courses, it was urban planning studio or urban planning workshop. We were assigned to tackle the issue of gentrification or urban gentrification in Manukhay neighborhood in Beirut. So we thought beyond the theoretical report, and this is the most important issue, in a more innovative way that responds and reflects the existing dynamics that are taking part in the neighborhood. So that's Javier.
So, hi, this is Ali Zakari, and I'll be finishing what Ali started. I'm a graduate student at the Masters of Urban Planning and Policy program. So, as part of this urban planning workshop, we started thinking, as Ali said, beyond the theoretical and how we can implement and translate knowledge that academic knowledge into simplified critical language that can be understood by the community and the public realm. So what we did as part of this workshop and with the support of our professors is that we did a snake and ladder game that addresses the gentrification issue that Manukhay neighborhood was suffering from. And then after that, this informal collaboration that was happening was where we started thinking of tactical projects that would foster and improve the socio-spatial quality of life in the city, and how we can activate open spaces within the city and create new platforms for social interaction through specific targeted urban interventions, or what is known as tactical urbanism. So we formed like an informal collaboration, and after our first project, which is the Snake and Ladder project, which is pretty much a snake and ladder project but on a big scale and painted on the streets, the AUD Neighborhood Initiative took the step to encourage us to incorporate this project in several areas, to fund other projects, and to initiate new projects with us, such as the Red Reading Group, which is typically a reading booth for book exchange in the city without the logistics of a library. It's a free library, basically, where anyone can put a book or take a book. So this is how AUD Neighborhood Initiative exposed us to its networks, funded our project, and initiated new opportunities with us. So this is really...
Robbie, I have a question here on this.
Thank you. Are there any more comments there? We've got a couple of questions here. And Beirut?
Yeah, just a few more. Maybe we'll take two more.
Then we'll come back to you again.
Yeah, okay. Rana?
Hi, Rana Hassan. I entered the program in 2007 and took my time to finish it. So I graduated in 2011. And while I was in the program, there were lots of things happening in planning in general in Lebanon because of the reconstruction. First, the reconstruction of after the 2006 war, and then the NY-Beirut reconstruction project. So in my case, I engaged in the NY-Beirut reconstruction project. I worked there with a grassroots initiative that was trying to impose a participatory process in the reconstruction, and it worked. And there was a long process that is still ongoing of reconstruction of NY-Beirut. And so while I was in the program, I engaged in this project, and then I took some time off from the program. And this is something I really appreciate. I feel that it's a privilege to be able to be in a program that encourages us to go out, even if it's going to delay the academic process of finishing the master's. So, and for me, so after I worked for 2 years in Alberta, then I came back gradually to the program, and I did my thesis on how Palestinian refugees are able to acquire housing bypassing the exclusionary rules in Lebanon. And with that experience, and in general from the program, what I took is for sure the critical thinking, but also perspective. Not so much, I still do not identify myself as a planner in one way, but I feel that the experiences we were able to see through studying in this program and through the networks of that the professors of this program also provide us in some way is that we can take different roles. And for me, what is very interesting is how, as planners, we can have a role in grassroots mobilization. And I see that with time, recently in the last few years, because I'm studying this now in my PhD, how urban planning, how the city can be an important component in social movements and social mobilization. So the challenge for me is how to keep this balance between being able to work in a grassroots way on the ground without leaving aside the critical thinking. So I think this is a challenge that does not have one solution. It's continuous, and I think it's good that we are living it and not sticking to one of the two places. Yeah.
Ali Asma, second year MD student. I'll just talk briefly about my personal experience. I started my BA in 2006, and then in 2007, I started interning with Rabia on the post-war reconstruction. So this was, I'm saying this because it was the first shift in my thinking and career from the pure technical architecture thinking, the community-based and the fieldwork, talking to people. So I started realizing that architecture is not just simply drawing and designing houses or drawing maps. It's actually the engagement with the people and what they want. So this the second shift was in 2009, and I still remember the first meeting I attended with Rabia also. So when I entered the meeting, it was all big words, like buzzwords. I didn't understand anything, engagement, service, developmental planning, or whatever. The second day, Rabia told me that I have a site visit to Einstein. So this was the second shift where I started thinking that the architecture we study in the university is just purely technical. We have to see the ground, understand the dynamics on the ground, what's happening, and link it to our major in order to try to impact a bit. So then after practicing for around 5 years, I started the master's program. And the interesting part was how to link between the practice and the theory after practicing in the domain. So here comes, I want to just reflect on Dr. Muna's approach when she said how to teach students design common work. So we started like the first course, which was interest planning theory, and it was really interesting because it's very rich in the theoretical aspect, and it introduced us to the different types of planning. And when I reflected back, I saw that everything I learned before about urban design, and the theories of urban design, is actually the total wrong planning. We thought the totally wrong planning, or the planning that's now being retrained in a way. So that's retrained in a way that interacts more with the community and engages more with the community. So after that, it was the Aleppo workshop, which was really interesting. Although we didn't have an access to the grounds or we couldn't access the site, but it showed us different aspects, like from political, social, economical approaches of urban design and how we can work in like post-war reconstruction and in war-torn communities in the area. And I'll end with this video we're taking now, which is in Hiroshima, and the interesting part is our work with the municipality and the relation between like the university, community, and different stakeholders, and how can we impact the community and provide like how can the university or us as students or graduates or urban planners or designers provide this urban think tank for local authorities in different areas in Lebanon to provide them with the know-how, because many local authorities and municipalities and agencies are willing to work, but they need guidance, they need the way, and this link between like the university and the outer boundaries of the university itself can do major impact, like in the area or in the region.
Thank you, Ali. Back to you, Rami.
Thank you, Rabia, and all of the people who spoke, and we'll come back to you to get some more comments. I'd like to just ask one question to Mona and Rabia, and then we'll have some questions from here. From what we've heard, it seems like the private sector and the public sector both, and this has been a discussion about Lebanon, but this probably applies to other countries, that these are kind of the key partners that you're dealing with in your jobs, and that the professors have to deal with in their education and training. So I'd like to ask, from your experiences so far, is it possible to categorize broadly, saying that the private sector is broadly a positive partner doing good things, or is the private sector largely a problem because of what they're doing on the coast or in expensive housing or whatever? And same thing with the public sector, because we've heard a lot about people in the public sector engaging with you, responding to what you're doing and evolving. So I'd love to hear your quick thoughts on those, Mona and Rabia.
Should I start?
Yeah.
All right. So I think it's too hard to say the public sector is bad or the private sector is good. Or I think that we really need to nuance our perception of things, because we have partners in both worlds. And one thing that you want to keep in mind in Lebanon is that sadly the boundaries between the two worlds are often very blurred, and this is one of the difficulties you face when you're trying to think about the respective roles of actors if you want to set in place a project. One thing I can say that struck me in our work on the coast is how much the public actors had a sense that they were balancing between the claim we were making on behalf of the public nature of the beach on the one hand and the private interest of the landowner on the other. And so we would get answers like, I need to balance, I'm not you, I cannot just be an advocate of the public. And it always struck me that this idea that they have, that they're not representatives of the public good, that they're actually sort of balancing between the different kinds of interest groups. And when I come and I don't have a stake other than the fact that I know that an open, shared public beach in the city is a major economic engine and a source of employment generation for the city, that would be really important. And I'm told that I am a stakeholder here, and then there's another stakeholder who's saying this is my private property. So I feel that this thing about the common good again and in public agencies is often missing. And this is where I find it difficult sometimes to work with the public sector. But I do think that other private and public sector actors are trying, and that that there have been very fruitful collaborations. We also need to think that the private, we are representing today a biased sample of our graduates. So we are presenting those who are working in the nonprofit, and a lot of them are based in AUB units that actually are trying to make a change, like the Neighborhood Initiative, like the Center for Civic Engagement. But we do have a lot of our students who are doing good work, and they're in the large-scale private companies of the city. They're leading planning and urban design units, so they're also doing a different kind of work, but also very interesting work. And that work is often in the region, it's not just in Beirut.
Rabia. Rabia, go ahead.
Sorry, one second.
Oh. Hang on, we lost you, I think.
What? We're unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead. The picture's gone, but we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so in the Faculty of Agriculture, they teach students about the 44 different natural ecological zones in Lebanon, and that's very unique to such a small geography, small country. So I think, so this is on the natural ecology. But if you look at the political ecology of Lebanon, I think you have much more than 44 political ecological zones. So they might even be 1,100, which are the direct projections of the number of municipalities. And even you can even go down to the size of alleys or small neighborhoods. So what I'm trying to say is that to reflect on my personal practice, there has been planning policies have been used to influence or even reinforce ideologies, unrestricted steadfastness as ideology in certain zones. In other zones could be to reinforce unlimited or unleashed unrestricted profit, or it could also be used to reinforce informality. So it's not about the private versus public, because in Lebanon, sometimes they fully merge or they can drastically diverge. The thing is, how can you adopt, what are the value systems that we as planners or practitioners adopt while working in any of these different political ecological zones? So if we have like clear code of conduct for the practice, for the planners, certainly for the planners, this could uniform and start building a consensus for this incremental change that I fully believe in. Again, if you look what Maya was mentioning, and Mona knows that for a fact, we don't have a ministry of for planning, and that's for a reason. You don't have national policies and plans that are. We might have them as blueprints, but when they intersect on the grounds of realities and the challenges, they totally fade out. And again, that is because we're not able to align them to these different political ecological zones. So for me, what I would highlight is the value system for any practitioner to have and adopt.
Thank you, Rabia. We have a couple of questions here. Alison?
Got one. It strikes me that Dr. Mona and Rabia, you're both fundamentally, you've come out of the academic tradition, and that you are asking yourselves and your students to learn different skills and interact with the neighborhood. I think a professor is probably used to trying to spark the imagination of his or her students, but it's a very different thing to spark the imagination of the city population as to what that city can look like. I don't imagine it has been a completely easy or clear path trying to do this. And I wondered if Mona and Rabia and maybe a student or two in Beirut might address that. You don't go to school or live within the academic community in order to, traditionally, in order to go out and change the city. So I think you're asking for something that is really interesting perhaps a little bit pioneering, but it can't be easy. How's that? That's not a great question.
No, it's
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, of
So,
course.
let me just add
Yeah.
to that, and what you're all talking about is very political processes.
Yeah.
You're talking
Yes.
about power, territoriality, control, authority, and in the end, a lot of money. So how do you combine all these
How
things?
do we navigate that?
Yes.
Okay, let me take first the imagination question. I think it's an interesting one. So if you look at the tradition in planning, the early planners in the West, you think of Le Corbusier and others, really had an image of what the city should look like. Many of them were urban designers, architects, and they drew these big pictures and they thought they could basically say this is what it should be. And these were major failures that ended up putting people in very difficult situations. Some of the most important interventions were completely demolished. So retrospectively, somewhere in the mid-60s, people learned the lesson that you're not supposed to really design something so macro. And this whole idea of imagining and putting out visuals disappeared from the discipline. But then you look into the 2000s and you see that something has happened. Conditions have deteriorated. People live in very difficult conditions. And often when you're trying to talk to them about different possibilities, it's hard for them to imagine. If they're in a situation where you live in a dense neighborhood, it's congested, you begin to ask yourself, how are people going to imagine an alternative? And for me, one of the most interesting moments was in 2006, following the war. Rabia talked about this experience. I was interested in working in one of the suburbs of Beirut, Har Tahrir. That was a very dense neighborhood, very congested, was known as the headquarters of Hezbollah in the southern suburbs of Beirut, and was devastated in 2006. There was like 227 buildings that were razed to the ground. Over 20,000 people had completely lost their homes. And we didn't know, and people did not know how the reconstruction would be and what it would look like. And we wanted to advocate something that was different than just rebuilding the neighborhood as it was, which was Hezbollah's decision at the moment. And so what we did is we took a slogan that had been issued by Hezbollah, which was that the city would be rebuilt more beautiful than it was. And we went on the street and we started asking people, so what do you think is more beautiful? What does it mean? Like when someone tells you your neighborhood is going to be more beautiful than it was, what does it mean? And this was with one of our students who sadly could not make it today. But people said to her things like, a lot said like downtown Beirut. And like downtown Beirut means basically sidewalks, public spaces, a better shared infrastructure. And what was very interesting is that she was conducting those interviews in October 2006. And in the early November 2006, Hezbollah held a community meeting. And they told people that the neighborhood would be rebuilt with modern buildings, that would have their private generators, that would be built with the high standards. So they basically shifted the conversation from people's interest in the public, in the commons, to an interest in the building itself. And for us, this was where we wanted people to be able to imagine that there was something public that could actually be done in the neighborhood. So we tried different strategies, and ultimately we had a big workshop in our program, and it included some of the students who are here today. And we drew the neighborhood with actual design strategies. And we started visiting the municipalities, holding community meetings, organizing events in the order of engineers and architects to push for the idea of a different possible post-war reconstruction. It's quite challenging because when planners try to engage people, often there's a work of translation that has to happen. When you tell people, do you want more cross-ventilation in your house? People will say, I just want it as it used to be, leave me alone. But then when you say, did your food goods to rot in your closets? Could you keep your food for more than 2 weeks? Or where did you hang your laundry? Then what we mean as architects and urban designers when we think of cross-ventilation, lighting, becomes the everyday substance of that people can relate to. And so I think this work of translation and doing visualization can shift the conversation and allow people to imagine something else. But it's not easy, and it's particularly not easy because the imagination of a city that has a strong social infrastructure that is shared is inherently political. It is about a different kind of politics. It is a politics that recognizes that there's a we, and that this we that we all are has to be defended and invested in. And that requires a change in the political thinking. And so I do think that in Beirut, our work and the work of many other organizations has worked in this direction. And often a small demonstration shows people much more than when you just talk about it. The neighborhood initiative intervention in Jeanne d'Arc Street in Beirut that widened the sidewalk and greened it and put a couple of sidewalks of benches is much more meaningful and important in showing how it can be than any visualization we can do. I think the work that Ali and Abir was talking about, putting a small post with a little bookstore, a bookcase on the sidewalk, is similar, because people can then experience the possibility of something different. We do this with our program, with the students. We talk a lot about visualization and about translation. We also do it as activists, those of us who are engaged more in the political life through Beirut Madinati. This was definitely our number one strategy, designing and putting images out of concrete streets and showing what it would be if the sidewalk was wider. And actually taking it to people and saying, look, do you know your street could be different? And I think this is really the work that I'm thinking of.
Rabia?
When I was a student, I was still very much inspired by the big, grandiose strategies and ideologies. Mona came in with an assignment. She gave us an assignment on one page. We had to write it during the session. What is define your role as a planner or as an architect? It was very funny because the way I described it is like I defined my role as a dictator, because I didn't. Again, I was very much inspired by the mega gestures. And I didn't believe much in incremental change, so I learned it the hard way. And so now I totally shifted that. If I reflect on my profession 10 years or 12 years back, it drastically shifted. And I fully adopt the concept of, especially when working in informal areas, in cities that are thriving and are facing so much challenges like Beirut and its suburbs. The key, the golden rule for intervention is upgrading from within. Even when we worked after 2006 in Vintage Vale and in other areas, how can your technical expertise, I don't think that it's compromised more than maybe 5% or maximum 10% of what is needed to really realize successful change. The skills that you need in such areas, again, more than the technical, you need your interpersonal skills, your negotiation skills, conflict resolution, campaigning, diplomacy. You have to be very practical, pragmatic, but again, you should never lose focus from the values that you have to adopt and believe in while doing the practice. So that was the case when, for example, we worked again in the southern suburbs, in different areas in Lebanon. But I think what's also now facing the new graduates is much more challenging because they will be the generation who will have to go out there and deal with the reconstruction of totally destroyed cities. And we're not talking about some small neighborhood. We're talking about cities where millions of people have been living, and they will have to go back there. And it is their responsibility. They will be overwhelmed with these responsibilities, which is much more, it entails much more than the technical. The technical expertise is extremely needed because this is what gives them the competitive edge out there. But what would they do when they end up, again, if Ali will take the reconstruction studio from Aleppo and will find himself a few years from now really leading a team of I don't know how many with him to do it in real life. What would they do when they go to Iraq and they have to deal with the reconstruction or the rebuilding of Mosul? So I think that also puts a lot of, it brings new questions and challenges into AUB, and especially to the urban design and planning department. And I think this also makes Muna's workshop or studio, the urban design workshop and studio, very much needed in this critical time. So again, I think the students need to gain more than the technical, the negotiation skills, the campaigning skills, and all what is needed to deal with these new set of challenges.
Thank you. Justin, do you have a question here?
Oh yeah, I was kind of following up on what Rami was asking was, in order for both the public and the private sector to really take the concerns of the public seriously, they have to show some sort of power. And as you mentioned with like Beirut Medinati and maybe like the You Stink movement, maybe this is which was almost explicitly about social infrastructure and whatnot. I know, and also one of the students mentioned working with grassroots organizations, and it seems from what Maya was saying that there has been some sort of more care on the public sector's part for the sort of concerns of the public. Do you find that since You Stink, Beirut Medinati, Mobility, that either the private or the public sector are taking these social infrastructure concerns more seriously?
Yes, I am hopeful in the sense that I feel that there is a growing number of people who see that the way things have been running is not working and are asking for something different. And there is at least in the political discourse, things have shifted. There is an attempt to address public issues. There is an attempt to talk about that. At the same time, I mean, we have to be aware that Lebanon is at the edge of a very serious financial crisis, that unemployment is higher than ever, and that this is particularly true for our students and for the younger generation. And this is going to affect a lot where the public discourse is going to go in the coming months. So it's been recently a little bit more difficult to talk about issues of public space, of services, because what's really on people's mind is there going to be a devaluation? Am I going to be able to find a job? And I think that these are very, very serious concerns that we need to locate in our discourse and connect them to how we understand the city. I understand the city as an economic engine. If you look back in the last 20 years, the understanding of what creates the global economy is that there's always 600 cities around the world that actually produce much of the global wealth, over 80% of the global wealth. And if I remember the report that was put out by McKinsey a few years ago, basically said there are always 600 cities. So which cities it is changes, but there's always going to be cities. And I think that cities in Lebanon are an amazing opportunity for growth. 80% of our population lives in 5 big cities. And these cities are very networked. It's a small territory. They each have its own identity. So I think what's asked of us now is to go beyond saying it's dysfunctional and put a possible economic strategy based on those cities. This may shift the conversation. And I think this is where I draw the difference a little bit between the You Stink movement and what Beirut Medinati and eventually other movements did. Because You Stink said it doesn't work. And when it came for them to agree on what works, it did not in the beginning. While what Beirut Medinati said is, this is what works. Let's do it. We have a program. You can implement it. And this is where I find hope. And I think this is where people found hope. And people hung on it so much hope. We would be stopped on the street by people who would say, oh, you're going to bring my kids back from the US. And I'm like, I never spoke about, this. But people, everything that they're dying to have, a local economy, the possibility of a future in the country, people attached it to this. The hopeful thing about Lebanon is also that it's a tiny country. So it doesn't take much to actually have a big change. but you want that first and foremost.
From what you're saying, and what we're hearing from Beirut as well, is we're talking about really all sectors of life: water, housing, transport, jobs, etc. So if you take it back into AUB, and again the role of the university in promoting social justice in the city, which is our theme, does this require that, for instance, the Urban Studies and Planning Department link more directly with sociology, with the business school, with public health, with engineering for transport and solar energy? Do you have a serious multidisciplinary mechanism to bring in all of these dimensions, which you don't have all the expertise in yourself?
Absolutely. You cannot speak of the urban without having these kinds of interdisciplinary research groups that actually tackle issues from all sides. And so a lot of us are actually collaborating across departments on specific research projects. I think the conversation about forced population displacements and the initiative for AUB for refugees also attempted to do that, bring people from the different faculties together to talk about things in an integrated way. At the scale of the urban, issues of urban pollution have been very high in our collaborations with colleagues in engineering. And for us, the establishment of the Urban Lab is definitely a next step in creating that anchor in AUB where we can have colleagues from the different faculties actually involved in thinking together about these challenges. They are multidisciplinary challenges. They require us to connect the cost of pollution on health and on employment. They require us to think about the layout of our cities and our transportation strategies in relation to people's practices. So they cannot be studied outside of that. And I think this is what's so nice about city planning. It's that we've come to recognize how complex urbanization is and to understand it really as a process and to really try to think about how, when you're a city planner, I think you're almost playing chess. You're not as powerful as you think. So again, back in the 50s, people used to think you draw a line and then it works. And now we realize that the market is a much stronger player than we are. Developers are gonna have their interests. And so this is what I usually tell the students. You're playing chess and you're not the strongest player. So you have to map three things. You map your knowledge, there's a technical piece, but you also map power, and you see who's powerful and how, and you map institutions and trajectories of possible change. If you map these three, you can get success. And that's a little bit how we work about it. So there's the knowledge, the technical knowledge, but also there is definitely the power knowledge. And that's something that is, I think, developed as an approach in conversation with planning theory, because it's not only like this in Lebanon, it's the same anywhere else where you're working. The difference is when you look at studies that were done, for example, in Denmark about power structure that are amazing. You hear that they went on public television and they proved the public decision maker to be wrong, and then the media basically changed public opinion and it mattered. It doesn't really matter in Lebanon when you change public opinion. So it's not the media that is our only partner. It matters. It is a partner. We work with them. But then there needs to be more. And so that's, it's a little bit more complicated. But we're still thinking about it. And I think there's a lot of space for AUB to be involved in partnership even with other universities in bringing this change.
Any other questions here, comments, before we go back to Beirut? All right. Rabia, back to you. Have some 2 or 3 more comments from participants there. And one question particularly I'd ask, those of you who have already graduated and are working, looking back, how would you advise your professors to revise the curriculum and what they're teaching students today? Or are there things that you suggest could be changed?
I mean, as I was saying before, program was actually life-changing for me. I completely changed career path combining my public policy degree. It's something that's not very common in Lebanon, especially that everyone comes from a design, so 80% of people come from a design background. However, what I would suggest is maybe, especially now that during my current role at Yan Habitat, we really have to deal a lot with the governance institutions and stakeholders. So maybe there can be a course that's specifically for that and actually engaging us with the stakeholders in order to see how we can be changers, and try to start from changing the mindset of planning stakeholders and institutions in order to actually start to learn how to deal with such actors, paving the way for our professional career. Thank you.
Other comments in Beirut?
So we have two more.
Okay.
I would say lobbying for what I want. I would encourage, I think this is happening, but even more partnerships with ongoing initiatives of planning from my perspective, from the grassroots, planning from the grassroots, but also maybe other practices that make the students be question, but also see the different sides of how things can be done in the practice, and also support in this way when it comes to grassroots initiatives or to social movements, how the university can be supporting these ongoing initiatives through the students or through other ways also. And the program was a turning point in my career too, even though I graduated from architecture. During the 2 years I was in the program, 2013, 2015, we did engage with both the private sector and the public sector. We had direct interaction with all stakeholders. We analyzed ongoing projects and past projects. And at the theory level, I didn't recommend any changes on it. But probably at the practical level, perhaps we were lucky to have a very solid planning workshop with Professor Adil Halal, and we were able to cover so many aspects in the planning realm. But from what I've seen in the students, the workshops that happened before and after my graduation, I think that it seems that this workshop is not always consistent on the level of comprehensiveness it can offer to students. So probably this is something that can be solidified.
Thank you. I'll present myself very quickly. So I'm Serge Geology and I'm a professor of urban practice. And actually this question falls in line completely with the discussions we've been having with Professor Fawaz. So my job is kind of to try to bridge the gap between the practice and the academy. And we're trying really so now I'm in charge of coordinating with Professor Ramzi Farhad, the urban studio. And this is the entry point where we're trying really to introduce the practice and put the students completely within the reality of the context and push them to find some creative solution while at the same time applicable. And in parallel also really initiating some reflections on how to bring closer the practice and the academy. And I think this is something we'll be really pushing forward on all levels in the program. That's the only thing I wanted to share.
We still have one student, last comment here.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Sunal Lini, and I'm a current student in the Master's of Urban Planning and Policy program. I'm also a research assistant at the Science Institute. With regards to what I advise my professors to do, I'd like to talk a bit about my background. I was trained as an architect in the Lebanese University. This is my bachelor's degree. And if I want to compare both universities, I would say that my AD professors should create a platform to teach a bit other professors in other universities how to, no, really, a bit about equality and the values which we were taught here. As an architect, I was trained to please clients. I was not trained to be active in such fields, and that's the only thing that I think is critical in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rami.
You're all done. Any other comments there? We have time for one more if anybody wants to say anything.
That's it.
Okay, so back here to closing thoughts from Mona and Rabia.
Should I do it
Yeah.
first? Well, first, thank you. I mean, I have to say that as someone who's been teaching for a long time, there's nothing that makes you more proud and happy than to feel humbled by the achievements of the graduates of the program and where they've taken our work and our ideas way beyond where we imagined. And I think this is one of the most rewarding things. I wanted to comment on how we teach in one way, because I think Soha touched on something quite important. One of the things about the graduate programs that you should know is that more than half of our students actually come from other universities in Lebanon. They come from the Beirut Arab University, from the Lebanese University. So they come from universities that are more modest and have less of a tradition of critical thinking. And I'm used to telling students, so what do you think in the class when I'm working? And I remember one of the first semesters when I started teaching, a student stood up and she was known to be brilliant in the university where she was. She came as a stellar student and she started screaming. She told me, you have no business in what I think. You come to the class, you teach me, I take notes, and then you give me an exam and I show you that I heard you well. What do you have to do with what I think? And I think that over the years, I've seen her. She's now leading in a private agency and she's blossoming. And I think what she thinks is very, very important, and she realizes how important it was. She became one of our best students. She did a thesis in a refugee camp, designed alternative regulations that could improve the space of the camp, really turned upside down how you think of urban design. So I feel that these kinds of pedagogical strategies that we take sometimes for granted because we are at AUB are super important, and they do play a role also. It's not just the content of what we teach. So this for me, I think, is Soha triggered this idea as a closing thought about what we do beyond the MUPP/MUD program at AUB. And aside from that, I'll just say that I'm really grateful to everyone who sat. I see some of our colleagues, Professor Yazigi, Professor Farhat, have been sitting through this. Some of the students, some didn't get the opportunity to speak. Some of them are doing amazing interventions in refugee camps, working with kids. Some come with this experience and it's transformative. Others come without the experience and they learn. Some of these people have run for office. They had more courage than I did. So I just want to say it's really great to be with this community, and that's what gives us hope that there's a positive future for our region.
Thank you, Mona. Well, I think the number of students and graduates and professors there is a testament to the dynamism of what you do in your program and Rabia does in his. And this is what makes AUB such a special place, the faculty and the students together. Rabia, closing thought from you?
Sure. I have one main concern or fear is that after the students graduate, not many of them will be able to forge a space where they will be able to practice this beautiful experience or learning that they gained from such a program. And again, AV, I think it is a safe haven. It's, for me, it's the only safe haven in Lebanon. it is a liberal-based education university where all ideas could be discussed freely. You can really brainstorm with students, with graduates, with faculty members from different disciplines on issues of common concern. So can we extend it and make, whether it's the urban planning program or any other programs, can we extend it to becoming a lifelong learning journey where we connect with our alumni on issues that are of mutual interest for them, and we can start building projects that can really induce change in Lebanon or in the region. So again, can AUB also extend what we're offering for our students into the alumni after they graduate, so they can come back and they continue the journey of learning and exchanging the ideas, and again enriching our program and start setting up common strategies that can enable them and us and the country to thrive and grow.
Thank you. Well, on that note, I should just mention that one of the things that's happened since we've launched these briefings here in New York, we've expanded to other cities in North America, and we've now partnered with the North America Alumni Group here, and we're talking with alumni about doing more activities in different cities, but also with having alumni, professional, successful alumni all over the world come back to AUB and contribute not just donations and money, but to share their knowledge. So what you're talking about, Rabi, I think is something that several of us are thinking about, and different people at AUB are looking at, and definitely it will be part of this process as we continue this exciting journey to take AUB's knowledge around the world and interact more with people all over the world and have a two-way flow, not just with colleagues and partners around the world, but with this extraordinary community of AUB, thousands of AUB alumni who love the place for reasons that we can all appreciate because it's such a lovable place. So with that, I want to just thank everybody in Beirut, Rabia, Joseph, Saline, and others, all of the participants, and here in New York, the people who've done the hard work to do this every week, Allison, Justin, Najib, Barbara, Dennis, and others behind the scenes. So thank you, everybody. That's the end of our Beirut, New York briefing, and we will do another one in a few weeks. And if you're interested, follow us online. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
There you go.
Bye. That was
Thank you.
great, Mona, thank you.
Yes,
It was
great.
really wonderful.
And
Well, it's
I'm
great to
going to
hear.
nominate Mona to be Queen of the Arabs.